Welcome to Washington State China Relations Council's webinar on the importance of international students on the post-secondary educational system. My name is Man Wang. I'm the director here at the WCRC. I'm also the moderator for this webinar today. Thank you for joining us. So for those of you who are not familiar with us, the WCRC was founded in 1979 and is the oldest state-level organization promoting stronger ties between the U.S., Washington State, and China. The WCRC serves as a thought leader on U.S.-China issues, curates programs and exchanges to improve mutual understanding, and is a nexus for business and government leaders on both sides of the Pacific. So in 2020, we hosted or co-hosted over 40 China-related webinars, quite successful. And we established our sister organization, the Washington State China Relations Fund, a 501c3 charitable nonprofit organization in early 2020 to support our educational programs and local community efforts. If you'd like to know more about our organization, to partner with us, or to support us, please visit our website at www.wscrc.org. or contact us directly via email or over the phone. So talking about today's topic. So international students not only bring talent and cultural values to their institutions, but also contribute economically at the institutional, local, and national levels. The US Department of Commerce ranks international education as the 6th largest export service in the nation. For the 2019 to 2020 academic year, international students studying at U.S. colleges and universities contributed about $39 billion to our national economy and supported more than 415,000 jobs, according to NAFSA, the Association of International Educators. Their report shows that for every 8 international students, 3 U.S. jobs are created and supported by spendings on tuition, accommodation, dining, retail, transportation, telecommunications, and health insurance. As the #1 international students' place of origin, Chinese students alone contributed about $16 billion to our national economy, according to the Open Doors 2020 report. In Washington State, more than 26,000 international students contributed about $924 million to our economy and supported about 8,300 jobs. And 38% of international students in Washington State are from China. So in addition to the economic impacts, learning along and interacting with international students provide our students and also the local communities a unique platform to better understand international immigration issues, to gain cross-cultural experiences and communication skills, to build a global network for professional development, and to be well-equipped to be a global citizen. Unfortunately, the enrollment of international students has declined in the last couple of years due to the immigration policies and other factors. And of course, the COVID-19 has undoubtedly aggravated the issue. So to better understand the impacts of international students, in particular Chinese students, as well as the opportunities and the challenges facing the international educational system in the US and Washington State, we are delighted to have 3 experts representing 3 institutions to share their thoughts on us today. We have Dr. Jeffrey Redinger from the University of Washington, a 4-year institution with the most Chinese students in Washington State. Ross Jennings from the Green River College, which has the highest number of Chinese students in the community college program. And Dr. Michael Edwards from the Pacific Lutheran University, a private university who recently became the host of Washington's Confucius Institute for the study of Chinese language. So let me introduce our 3 panelists first. Dr. Jeffrey Redinger is Vice Provost for Global Affairs and Professor of Law at the University of Washington. Dr. Redinger has leadership and administrative responsibility for the university's diverse global programming, including support for international research, study abroad, student and faculty exchanges, and overseas centers. For 2021 to 2022, Dr. Rittinger is also president and the chair of the board of directors for NAFSA, Association of International Educators. This is the report that we mentioned before, the organization that produced the report. So Ross Jennings is the senior director of international education at Green River College in Auburn, Washington. Under his leadership and in that of his successor, Green River's international enrollment has ranked in the top 10 of the 1,100 US community and technical colleges since 2012. Ross has spoken and written extensively on international student recruitment, retention, and overseas partnership building. He has recruited and developed educational partnerships in China since 1994. We also have Dr. Michael Edwards, who serves as the fifth liaison between the Confucius Institute of Washington State, located at Pacific Lutheran University, and other partner institutions in the state. Michael also serves as an instructor for the Introduction to American Business, Global Business, and Project Management programs at the Pacific Lutheran. Michael has a wide variety of experience in the field of education, including over a decade of experience in China. So before we dive into the discussion, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. So after about 30 minutes of moderate discussion, we'll answer questions from the audience. So if you have any question to the panelists, please type them in the chat box, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. I will collect and raise them to the panelists. And also this webinar is on record and will be posted to our YouTube channel in 24 hours. Last but not least, please make sure to mute yourself during the webinar. You have a best listening and learning experience. So now I'd like to turn to our panelists to have them introduce their international programs with a focus on China. So Jeff, Ross, and Michael. So it would be great if your comments can include the number of students and the economic, academic, and the cultural impacts of international students. So let's see, why don't we start with Jeff?
Thanks very much. I'm delighted to be here. I'll get to your specific question in just a minute, but again, some framing. Washington State, by most accounts, is the most trade-dependent state in America, and China is our top import and export partner. So we in higher education, in community colleges, liberal arts colleges, four-year comprehensives, and Research One institutions, part of our mission for the state is to graduate, create a pipeline of students who are comfortable operating in a context in which their entire careers, plural, will be defined by both cooperation and competition with persons from other countries and cultures. So we need to prepare them for that. And in this state, a particular emphasis, not an exclusive emphasis, but particular emphasis on China, given its importance to us. And before COVID, the University of Washington was proud that we were sending almost 3,000 undergraduates overseas each year, and we hope to get back to that. But that's only a small fraction of the undergraduates on our campus. So we need to bring the world to the University of Washington and to Green River Community College and to Pacific Lutheran. And we can do that by bringing international students, international scholars, and representatives of international businesses, government agencies, and the like, so that our students here who don't have the luxury of international travel develop that same mindset and skill set. I should note, as a public university, I always need to remind the audience that international students have not displaced domestic students at the University of Washington. We have record numbers of domestic resident students, Washington resident students, and have for each of the last half dozen years, at the same time that we've grown the number of international students. And these days, and I'll focus for this purpose on the Seattle campus in particular, just under 7,800 international students on our campus. That's about 16% of the total student population on the Seattle campus. And fully half, 3,800, a bit over 3,800 of them are from China. So it's a very significant part of our international student population. But again, it's because it reflects China's importance to our state and to the citizens of our state. You rattled off some of the NAFSA numbers, and for numbers specific to the University of Washington in the 2019-2020 academic year. So this is mostly pre-COVID. University of Washington, roughly $408 million in fees, tuition, and payments from our international students, and just under 5,000 jobs that were associated with those students. You're right that over the past 4 years, the number of international students coming to the University of Washington has dropped a very small amount, but to the United States more generally, it's dropped significantly. And that's because we've had an administration that opened for business with a ban on all people coming from predominantly Muslim and eventually a handful of African countries. And the messaging has been decidedly unfriendly for immigrants and for students, including students coming and then being able to stay to do optional practical training or to get green cards to continue to be part of our workforce. In terms of the University of Washington, it's important to note that the international students disproportionately are coming to major in computer science, which is our most popular major in any event, in business administration, and in some of the other STEM fields. And that proportion of students who are international is even more marked at the graduate student level. We simply cannot recruit the world-class students we need from the United States. They oftentimes have great job opportunities with a bachelor's degree in computer science. Why would they study all the way to a PhD? So some of our STEM programs literally depend, our ability to offer them depends on the international student population there. Whether it's artificial intelligence or any number of other domains, our world-class faculty would tell you they simply could not do the cutting-edge research they do without the presence of international students. They need the best and brightest from around the world, and we're fortunate to get it, particularly in terms of students coming from Asia. Our location is very favorable. Hiding out here up in the upper left coast, but it is it's a privilege and a great city. But the downturn in international student enrollments is not simply bad immigration policy and the like. There's growing international student concern about perceptions of America as a violent place, whether it's protests or gun violence or other kinds of things that are unsettling both to students and parents. And at the same time, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, other countries really have gotten their game together in competing with us. Indeed, even China has a really dramatic international student population at its top universities as well. Let me stop there because my two co-panelists I know have plenty to say as well.
Thank you, Jeff. You actually covered, many aspects of the following questions that I have, and then we can discuss them later. So now, Ross, so can you tell us about the Green River College's international programs and also in relation to Chinese students?
Sure. Well, thank you very much. And Jeff, thank you for discussing a wide range of subjects that will both save us some time and give us expertise. That's very important, I think. Green River is a medium-sized college for Washington State. We're about 8,000 students total, of which we're just under 1,000 students of international students for the first time in about 10 years because of a significant decline we've faced over the last 4 years, given both COVID and the Trump policies that Jeff had mentioned. Usually our Chinese students are about 1/3 of that international student population. And so of our students, international is about 12%. The reason students come to a community college, in Washington State at least, are two. One is transfer opportunities. And in Washington State, both Green River and our competing colleges have done a great job, I think, in setting up national transfer systems where our students, at least, and I think most of our competing schools, send students not only to UW, Washington State, Seattle University, some of the other places, PLU as well, but to all of the UC branches. We have students in every Big Ten school and in large numbers there as well. USC, New York University, everything other than the Ivies, which are not prone to transfer too much, other than Columbia, Cornell, and Penn. And we sent a kid to Brown as well. So students come there because, as our friend from Zhejiang had mentioned, it's a lot cheaper. You know, students spend about $10,000 a year on tuition at Green River, and I think at UW it's about $39,000, if I'm not mistaken, for undergrad. I'm not sure about PLU, but doing 2+2 saves a lot of money and gets students into some very good universities. So the cost savings is very significant. It's been our experience in China that the cost savings has not been a huge factor, in that it's kind of a Gucci country. And so if people want Gucci, they're going to pay for Gucci. And so the cost has not been a huge savings. But in other countries like Vietnam, it has been, and increasingly in India. So if students can stretch their money and still get into a very good university, they'll do that. The other thing that's germane to Washington State two-year colleges alone really is the adaptation of Running Start to international students. And so Running Start, I think most of us are from Washington State, but those that are not, is a program by which students from local high schools can go to a two-year college after year 10, after 10th grade, and take college level classes and have them double credit for high school completion, actually diploma issued by the college, and the two-year transfer degree. So in terms of China, for example, that means that students can come after 10th grade, or even after 9th grade, if they're 16 years old or older, skip 2 years to get into a university, well, basically to get a bachelor's degree 2 years early, and skip the necessity of either taking a Gaokao or SAT/ACT, because students transferring to all public universities in the United States and many privates do not require that for transfer. So that's why international students come to a school like Green River. Our Chinese and other country students have had a very significant effect at Green River for a number of reasons. One is engagement. As you probably recognize, for the most part, domestic students at a community college are parking lot, class, parking lot, job. That's just how it is. And so the ability or the desire to spend a lot of time doing social engagement at a community college is not there for a lot of students. And a lot of domestic students as well have their own friendships based on their high schools and their locality before they even come. So they're not as eager to make new friends as they might be going to a four-year college where everybody is new, relatively speaking. So international students get a lot more engaged for the most part than domestic students, with some exceptions. And at our college, for example, this year our student body president is from Indonesia, the vice president's from China, the chief justice is from Myanmar. That's not unusual. And amongst our 16 student activities leaders, 12 of them are from overseas countries. So that engagement is really important. And the local engagement is important as well, in that our students do a lot of volunteer activities as well as other kinds of things for the community because they have time and interest. In addition to that, the financial contributions, as Jeff has already mentioned, are very significant. In Washington State, the total contributions are roughly $1 billion a year. And for Washington State, that's 25,000 jobs. For Green River, the contribution's 30 million and 150 jobs. So it's very significant to a school, public school in particular, well, privates also, in that with the ongoing budget difficulties that public schools have had nationwide really over the last couple of decades, filling in the gap becomes important. The last 4 years have been tough on Green River, and a number of American schools. We're not a ranked university like Washington is. We are a good pathway there, but we're not the ranked university itself. So we lack, unfortunately, the Gucci effect that other schools might have. The Trump policies we've mentioned, Stephen Miller famously, his advisor famously said in 2017, I believe it was, that quote unquote, all Chinese students are spies. Well, I know a lot of students that probably aren't spies, but that didn't make a very good impression in China, nor domestically as well. That just added some suspicion that really didn't belong to be there. So these have been significant issues. We're hoping that given the new administration, things will change back to traditional support for international education, particularly since Vice President Harris's mom and dad are both international students. And in fact, President Obama's dad was an international student. So there are personal reasons as well as others. The hard part, quite honestly, for the major repivot is that China and the United States are competitors as well as large powers into themselves. And so not to go too far into this, there's something called the Thucydides trap, which is the difficulty of a large prevailing power adapting to a upcoming power and not having the lid come off. So that underlines education with China, but also generally speaking. So with that, I'll stop and give Dr. Edwards his floor.
Well, I would like to thank both of you for really filling in a lot of the empty spots that I don't have information on. I would like to talk today more about Pacific Lutheran University, which of the three is certainly the smallest. And even though it's smaller as a university, international education is really important for some of the reasons that both of you have already mentioned. Global education programs have been involved at PLU for decades, and close to 50, I'm told, close to 50% of PLU's student body participate in some form of study abroad program, and there are a number of them. Furthermore, for those students that can't travel, during the time that they're at PLU, they are exposed to both international students that come in and the returning students that have had experiences abroad. So throughout their academic experience at PLU, all students are exposed. And for a smaller institution like PLU, this is really important. PLU's international student population ranges from about 100 to 240 students from about 25 different countries. Now, this is pre-pandemic information, and it certainly is much smaller than some of the other institutions in the state. However, because it has been important over the year, PLU has 6 gateway programs where we send students abroad regularly, and those go to Mexico, Trinidad, Tobago, Norway, England, Namibia, University of Namibia in Africa. And that's a particularly interesting one because as a case study, it shows how a couple of individuals can get together and have an idea, and it grows over time. And then before you know it, there are grants and money comes in, and then there's an exchange of faculty and students are going both directions. It's a wonderful thing to see. But let me get to the 6th gateway program, and that's one relationship that PLU's had for over 30 years, and that's our relationship with Sichuan University in Chengdu, China. That, like the others, is one where there's two-directional exchange, both faculty, visiting scholars, students going both directions. and really does enrich Pacific Lutheran University. Now let me just kind of mine down or focus down a little bit on the program that I work in. And of course, my livelihood depends on our activity with China, but I'd like to talk to you for a moment about the ABC program that we run. ABC stands for American Business Culture. And we bring in students from Shandong Foreign Trade Vocational College, and they come for a year. And like so many programs around the United States, they take courses, and those courses are accredited to their home institution, and then they go home and they're able to graduate. But this program, I think, is really special, and it really does something for the state of Washington, because not only do they come and spend time doing coursework, they also are involved in American Business English. And that's just not regular English, but it's English that's focused on problems of how to do business in the United States. And then the third leg of the stool, if you will, is the business field trip program that I'm the coordinator for. We take, over the course of that academic year, students will go out to over 30 different businesses around the Puget Sound region and have actual meetings with real business people. And once more, this is not just a separate peg to the stool, if you will, but these are integrated. The instructor for the business English has been to more than 30 of those field trips. We integrate the program with the curriculum in the classroom. So it's really fascinating to me to watch these students when they first arrive and they're afraid to speak in class. And by the end of the year, they're ready to do all kinds of things. And it's very, very positive. During the course of the year, they're also involved in personal travel. We help them with that. And they go places like California and Oregon, New York, and Hawaii, but they also go to Alaska to look at the Northern Lights and to go on a dog sled ride. So there's a great deal of activity that comes out of it. So let me conclude by maybe focusing for a moment on what I consider the outcomes of this one program are for the students. First of all, the employment scene in China is very competitive. Our students at the end of their program, those that choose, go home and graduate, and they are really quite successful at getting good jobs in China because of the experience that they've had at Pacific Lutheran University. And might I add that this program is set up so that the students succeed, but we include communicating with the parents on this. Each field trip has a report that students give, and that report is put together and then sent back to China to share with their families so they can see what their students are doing. There's another track that students follow, and that is they go home, they graduate, and they turn around and come right back to PLU and begin to work to further their American education by getting an American university degree, either at PLU or at some other institution. And then they either continue on to work either here or in China. Let me finally say, I think there's a long-term benefit to this too. So far today, we've been talking about things more on a short-term benefit, but I think over the course of the lives, the next 35 to 40 years of these students' lives will be impacted by what they've experienced during their time here in the United States. I, for one, am very optimistic, because I spend time with these people and I see what their plans are and I watch them do things. I have already had calls from people that were my students in China calling back, wanting to connect with companies here in Washington State because they're familiar and have the confidence to do it. I think that's really good. I'll go ahead and stop there and just say thank you very much for inviting me to participate. This is a wonderful subject and it's very important to our state.
Thank you, Jeff, Ross, and Mikhail for sharing your facts, stories, and insights. So I myself was an international student for a relatively long time. I came to the States in 2000 to do my graduate work. International education, especially Chinese student education here in the US is always of personal and professional interest. And then, really to hear lots of the key points that you discussed in your introduction. And then, so I'm gonna go deeper into some of those issues and then talk about broader policy issues soon. So Jeff actually mentioned this in his introduction about, so basically what are the major studying fields that international students, especially Chinese students, study here in the US. And then, so not surprisingly, right, it's in a STEM field or, in the engineering or computer science field. I'm not sure whether it's the same for Green River and then Pacific Lutheran. So I think, my question is let's go deeper from this perspective, basically just help us understand more about the nature of international students and then their motivations, right? So in addition to their majors, and then so why do they choose those majors? And also, if you may not have the answer, but do you have any idea why they picked your school? And also, this is actually questions that people are kind of interesting. So are most of the students rich kids, or the so-called 富二代 sent their parents to the US to study, to do gene, right, and then go back home? Because I know it wasn't the case when I was when I first came to the States to study. Because back then, I think most of the Chinese students were graduate students, because they had either financial supports, right? Either scholarship or TA or RA. But I don't recall how many years, maybe in the last 5-10 years, and we've seen more and more undergraduate students who came to the States and study. So just any thoughts they can share on those will be great. Again, I guess we can start from Jeff, or if you like to share anything with us, just feel free to go ahead.
Sure. Well, you're quite right. I mean, historically, many international students came here for graduate degrees, and particularly if they were doing a PhD, then as now, oftentimes they are in fields where they can expect a research assistantship or a teaching assistantship that will pay a stipend to them, cover their tuition, and we're in effect paying them to be part of our research enterprise. Professional masters and undergraduate students tend to be more, you're paying for the privilege of being here, and we have relatively little scholarship funding for international students. We're working on that, but it's not historically something we did a lot of. And you're right that 10, 15 years ago, we would not have been talking about the numbers of undergraduate international students. But as we said, we need to grow the size of the University of Washington and better meet the needs of the state. Part of it was to grow the undergraduate international and non-resident student population. And some of them are wealthy. You can find some cars on campus that are staggering. But I point out to anybody that makes that comment that they need only drive down 15th Avenue Northeast and notice that, there are a lot of international students standing at the bus stops. So some of them are independently wealthy, and some are coming where extended family and or the village literally pooled money to get them here. And there's a part of me that thinks it's unfortunate that we have this remarkable commitment to access for Pell eligible students, for first generation students, and the like. If you come from within the state, we don't have the resources to extend that to students coming from California or from China. And indeed, the students coming from California and China are paying so much more in tuition that it allows us to keep the price low for the resident students. You asked a bit about some of the other considerations. As I said earlier, some of this is, if we did not have international students, particularly at the graduate level, we likely would not have the critical mass of scholars we need, researchers we need in some of the STEM fields and the like. But we, every day work our hardest to also train resident undergraduates to go into these fields. But as I say, oftentimes they can make a pretty lucrative living stopping well short of it. Some point later, I'll pick up on Ross's comment about some elements of our government thinking that 360,000 Chinese students in the US happen to all be spies, or all busy influencing our universities in nefarious ways. It isn't surprising from the former administration that if you were going to paint with a broad brush that said all people from Muslim countries, are a risk, that you would similarly paint with a broad stroke about all Chinese or all Russian students. Or the good news is we've been in a long conversation between higher education and the national security entities in the US government and Congress to help everybody, and the business community, to help everybody better understand. We understand what the real problems are and have long taken measures to protect academic freedom and the like. And people do from time to time get caught out for failing to appropriately fill out conflict of interest, conflict of commitment paperwork and the like, and in a couple egregious cases really went out of their way to hide that. But we're talking about handsful of cases, not hundreds, let alone thousands. So some of it is dialing down the hyperbole so that we can be back to a sort of calm, evidence-based conversation with students, whether it's from China or from any other country in the world.
Thank you. So Ross or Mikhail, do you have anything to share with us?
I'd add one thing. The immigration policy we have in the last 4 years has not been very good, although 2 of the 3 wives of our president were immigrants. Somewhat ironic. You look at us and Canada, we're diametric opposites in terms of how we view graduated international students. Back maybe 10 or 15 years ago, one of the presidents of Yale, I think it was Dr. Levine, said we're idiots because we should be issuing a green card at the same time we issue I-20s. And that essentially is what the Canadians are doing. And so they've recognized for some time that getting a very highly educated, a hardworking group of immigrants benefits everyone. They don't simply take jobs from Canadians, they add to them, as in fact has been the case in the United States. So it's not a zero-sum game. It's a pie getting continually wider by having well-educated international students becoming part of our system. So it's something we should not just assist with, but demand for our own benefit. And I think that with our new administration, the fact that Vice President Harris's mom and dad are both were international students, and in fact, President Obama's dad was an international student, gives kind of a personal reason as well as a theoretical reason to restore benefit or restore favor for international education as a whole.
Mikhail, anything that you'd like to add to what Jeff and Ross commented?
Well, I think it's been pretty well covered. I would just add a smaller note, and that is that the students we have coming to PLU from China seem to be adequately funded. They are able to buy a car and drive and do things, and that is different than what it was just not very long ago. And it makes it possible for them to make the kinds of extracurricular activity trips that they make and so on. And that's positive. Again, education, there's a difference between schooling, which is in the classroom, and the broader education that these people receive by getting out into American culture and society. And we do a lot to push them in that direction so that they understand more than just what they've gotten in class.
Thank you. So clearly, like, you think way ahead of me. So you're talking about some of the questions that I actually like to conclude this session. So looking at the bigger pictures, right? So we talk about So the policies, the impacts of policies on international students, especially Chinese students. So we talk about, during the last administration, there was a lot of negative attention and focus on Chinese students and scholars. We talk about many of whom were accused of espionage activities and also working covertly with the CCP. First of all, the China Initiative in Department of Justice and also the Confucius Centers were also the target of accusations. There's also been a lot of rhetoric and then misinformation on those issues. So we touched on that a little bit, but I'd like to know more about, so how did this overall negative climate in US-China relations affect current student and faculty and then Chinese student recruitment in your institutions? And also, in addition, how has the COVID-19 changed the learning and the teaching experience of international students?
Again, happy to kick off with some thoughts on that, and I'll start with the last one. Particularly for first-year students who were to have arrived on campus in fall of 2020, a very significant number of our international students remained in their home countries, partly because there was US policy that said you could not physically come here and do all remote classes. You had to do at least one or more in person. We were prepared for that, had courses, some of which are in the STEM fields, but the uncertainties around COVID meant that many of our international students have remained abroad. The vast majority of them are taking University of Washington classes in an all remote environment, but there are several hundred that we have assisted as UW students in enrolling in a university in their country of citizenship to take a blend of in-person courses in their home country and online courses, remote taught courses from the University of Washington. And that has been much appreciated, and we hope will help build the kind of warm feeling about how supportive the University of Washington is that those students will, when conditions allow, come to visit us in Seattle. I note in the blog there was also a question about, or the chat, some questions about how much we're doing to equip domestic students to thrive in Chinese and Indian and other business environments. And while I rightfully pointed out that a significant number of our international students, including our Chinese students, come here for STEM discipline training, they also populate our Chinese language program, particularly on to the doctoral level, and actively participate in training on campus about Chinese language and culture, and similarly, teaching multiple other languages and alike. So that surely is a core part of who we are and what we do. And you mentioned the Confucius Institute. We were privileged to host that from its origin. But when Congress passed a law that said I had to make a choice between competing for several $100,000 a year in Department of Defense Chinese flagship language program funding, or about half that amount of money from the Confucius Institute, my faculty understandably selected the bigger amount of money to allow them to do more programming. And we're eternally grateful that PLU took on the role of keeping Confucius Institute for the state of Washington alive, because it's got a partnership with every one of the four-year publics and a number of the private and technical colleges across the state to build that kind of expertise in Chinese language, culture, and the like, to prepare our workforce for success in those domains.
Thank you. Yeah, this is very unfortunate of what happened to the Confucius Institute, but that's what the former administration do. So Ross and Mikhail, do you have anything to this question or these questions?
I think, again, Jeff has handled most of the issues pretty well. For us, COVID has been a larger issue because other than an aviation university we have a relationship with in Chengdu, we don't have any significant university relationships in China to do the kind of program that Jeff is doing. So COVID has really harmed our overall enrollment by quite a bit. And so although we offer online classes, both for beginning students and for ongoing students, the beginning students have more of a difficulty doing all online from a foreign country and a foreign language than doing a hybrid program might be. So that's been a major constraint in our recruitment.
I would just add that there have been significant issues at PLU in the same way, and that we're doing everything we can to connect with the next class of students, and we're gearing up and hoping that they'll be here in the fall. And again, I'm an optimist, so I believe things will improve in all areas, but for this year, it's been really pretty tough. We do have some of the students in the program that I mentioned that were here and they stayed, and they're working on an American degree, and that's fine. But some of those that went back probably would have done some other things if COVID hadn't come along.
Sorry, so just given all the challenges, let's just stay positive. Just like, I remember when I was in high school, our politics class teacher always told us, well, the path is tough, the future is bright. So I still remember until today. So now let's look ahead. So you also touched on this previously, but then I wanted to hear more from you. So if you had the year of the Biden administration and his cabinet, so what would you want them to understand about Chinese and other international students in the US? And what policy changes would you advocate for? So we talk about other Western countries, how they attract international students, right? So then just like, given this, especially our neighbor Canada, so given this, what policies and strategies do you think the US should take to keep our universities and our country competitive as the world's leading source of innovation? And also what kind of role universities or colleges can play in this regard?
Yeah, and let me start there, because we tend to focus, as NAFSA does, on how much money international students bring here, but fully 1/4 of all of the $1 billion or more startups in the United States were founded by international students and scholars. So it's not just they bring money to universities, they bring money and innovation to the US economy. So with the Biden administration, part of it's just going to be a more welcoming rhetoric. If we can get welcoming rhetoric that acknowledges that the United States has long benefited from the best and brightest from around the world coming to our shores. There's talk of a coordinated U.S. recruitment strategy to counter some of what we see in some of the other English-speaking countries. Higher ed has been a little leery about U.S. government overly involved in coordinating how we all operate. So, I'll leave it to others to figure out, where that falls in terms of viable, but certainly eliminating the current green card backlogs and preventing future backlogs, creating a direct path to lawful permanent residency. Just a number of things we could do where, the sort of catchphrase is staple a green card to anybody that to the diplomas of anyone that graduates in the STEM fields. I would extend it beyond that because while STEM fields are great, there's an awful lot that our students in the arts and humanities and social sciences contribute, particularly 10 and 15 years out from graduation, when they tend more often to rise to the leadership of companies. So I wouldn't do it just for STEM, but maybe that's where you have to start. But a friendlier rhetoric, and then at the risk of being really controversial, and again, a question in the chat about the international students' fear of violence. This is a country with more guns than just about any place on the planet. And the number of school shootings and things like that isn't purely, a phenomenon of one U.S. administration. It's been a long time, and something is going to have to be done on that score to make American citizens feel more safe and comfortable, let alone international students and scholars.
Yeah,
I would just like to say, Jeff, I think you're right on with all of those comments. My wish list is a little bit more modest. And having spent days trying to coach people through WeChat about how to go and get their visa, I really would like to see us simply improve the training of the folks in our consulates. Having worked on that side, in other words, inside the American embassy, and watched those folks, if we just would start there and make things a little more civil, not so fearful, and that, for me, that would be a great first step.
Well, and Gary Locke proved you could do it. Gary Locke got the lead time for getting interviews and things like that down to 3 days while he was U.S. ambassador to China. It can be done. I mean, COVID has disrupted a lot of things, but it's, particularly in China, we have evidence that it can be done, that you can make this efficient and still do the due diligence we need so that Homeland Security and state and the like do, uncover those that really are undesirable folks because of their background or something like that. I will say that's not the business universities should be in. We have no special capabilities in that space. We're very good at tracking because we have to under federal law. We track international students in ways in this country that no other category of visa holders is tracked. But the notion that universities would be in the business of screening people for criminal or other kinds of misdeeds. No, there's a reason we have Department of Homeland Security and Department of State.
I would add one more thing. I think the visa question certainly is big. It affects us at a community college level probably more than universities do, in that it's hard for our State Department folks to really understand what a community college is and how it can be a serious choice for legitimate students overseas. That, well, if you're going to a community college, is that real? Does that just mean you're going to go over and become a house painter? Well, no, it doesn't. It means that they're making a legitimate choice for that. I think if we look at immigration in terms of there's a worldwide brain pool, and the more of that we can get for our own country, the better we're off, would be a good way of looking at things. And that would be a significant difference. And it's good to recognize that although US we get about 1 million international students a year in our country, the total number of international students in our, as a proportion of students total is about 5%. And in other competing countries like the UK, Australia, and Canada, it approaches 20%. So the question then becomes, are we really pulling our weight as a country? We are in terms of overall numbers, but in terms of percentage, we're probably not. So I think we have a lot to learn from others, as well as much to give in terms of advice we can offer.
Thank you. Especially, I totally just echo with you on the visa application perspectives, because I still remember how hard it was for me to get my visa when I came here in 2000. So it's like, everyone, it's like fighting a battle. So you have to have a strategy to talk to the consular in the consulate. So thank you for that. And then my last question is actually kind of related to some of the questions in the chat box. So about international student placement. So what are some of the most common job or career placement or activities for international students after graduating? What share stay, what share stay in Washington State versus elsewhere in the US, or go back to their home country?
Yeah, I should have, but don't have the exact numbers. I know that particularly at the graduate level in the STEM fields, 5 years out, three quarters or more international students are still in the United States. The Economist did a long and disturbing piece a couple of weeks ago on how that is changing as international students, but particularly Chinese students, see the dysfunctionalities of American democracy, particularly over the elections, and some of the other challenges, and are sort of disillusioned and thinking maybe they can go home. But a very significant number of international students do stay here. There are countries in which the University of Washington is engaged where we quite consciously want the international students to go home, because we need them as partners in their home countries for the next 25 to 40 years as we work with them and their countries to tackle some of the world's big problems, whether it's climate change or global pandemics or the like. So much as the US benefits from international students coming here and staying here, there are countries around the world that don't have the luxury of hundreds of thousands of their students studying overseas. They have hundreds, and so working hard to help those students imagine a future for their careers that's rewarding in their home country, but keeps them in partnership with any of our institutions. And Ross, I will say, anytime somebody asks you about whether this is a real education, happy to provide the information on that we accept 61% of the transfer student applicants from Washington community colleges and technical colleges, and are proud to have several thousand transfer students each and every year. We regard it as a real education.
We appreciate that. I'll be glad to quote you next time I'm in New Delhi. One of the biggest changes I've found with my Chinese students is the increasingly attractive home market for jobs back in China. 20 years ago, when I actually started recruiting in 1994 in China. It was a little premature because there wasn't a whole lot of folks who could afford overseas education at that point. But let's say 20 years ago, students were kind of, as students are from India now, largely looking to work overseas to offset the fees that they had to pay for their education. And now it's very attractive to go back home, find jobs in their field. There's still good reasons to work or study abroad, but that's increasingly narrowing, I think, in China. And one of the places that I've noticed our students work are in other countries. So I myself worked in the Middle East for 13 years, and a lot of our engineering students, nursing students, et cetera, might work in Kuwait or Saudi Arabia or someplace like that, as opposed to their own home country or the United States. So it's, I think, a worldwide employment opportunity scenario more and more, rather than simply a binary one of either the United States or home country.
Well, and I would add to that, and partly in response to that question in the chat, we, on 2 weeks' notice at the University of Washington, we're the first big public university, big university of any sort in the United States, to go all online as we pivoted from the tail end of winter quarter to spring quarter, a luxury that we had because of spring quarter. But some things will be true forever after. Right? We've learned that you can do high quality virtual learning, including high quality virtual international education, high quality virtual study abroad, virtual research abroad, virtual internships abroad. That's going to significantly expand access. Far more of our students are going to get some of those opportunities. So it won't be the only way we do international education, but it will make international education much more available.
Sorry, I'm still on this call thing.
Someone needs to mute himself. All right. Thanks, Jeff, for addressing actually, this is a question I was going to ask from the chat box. So from David Woodward, so basically just new ways of teaching and learning in higher education. Ross or Mikhail, do you have any comments on that? So basically the question is, Jeff summed it pretty well, but what if we assume that the educational model is fundamentally changing due to the impact of tech, remote learning, immersed tech on higher education? What does international education look like in the coming decade, given the fact that students today around the world are learning in completely new ways? Computation from around the world is driving down the price point for higher education. So how does this impact higher ed in the US? Any comments that you'd like to add would be great.
Well, I think Jeff put it quite well in terms of finding a way to deliver online education. I should mention, however, that it's the experience of living abroad is by itself a huge attraction, not only for international students, but for domestic students too. I remember when MOOCs came up back in the 90s and the question became of virtual education. Should it have the same, should it count the same way as a face-to-face class? And everyone came to realize if you're going to have online classes offered as regular classes, you have to say yes. And at the same time, there was a question as to whether the technology they had back in the 1990s, which is similar to Zoom, but less widespread, would ruin the idea of having to go abroad for conferences or visits or anything like that. And the answer was it really didn't, because the experience of getting to know people, having a beer or coffee or visiting different things is always going to be compelling. So I think what's going to happen is you're going to have a more of a good blend of online and virtual experiences and face-to-face, which has already been done for quite some time now with master's programs in business. We might have a program with 2, 3, or even 4 universities in different countries where you go there for a week or two and have the rest of your classes essentially online, and then go to the next university for a week or two and proceed from there. So I think those blends have already been done in business, at least, and are likely to take place in a lot of other subjects as well.
Let me just add that I agree with both Jeff and Ross in this case, because I think international education is changing, and it will change, and technology is having a huge impact on that. But at the same time, when I look at the field trip program that I have done over the last several years at PLU, we really couldn't do that through Zoom. It really matters for these young people to get out and actually physically meet people in American business and watch and look and see and smell and hear. And over the course of the year, that really does matter. Having said that, it's so much easier today for us to connect with those students in China with all the technological advantages compared to even 10 years ago. And so there's a kind of a jump start or a quick start that takes place. And we in higher education need to take advantage of that opportunity so that we can have the maximum benefit.
Yeah, I completely agree. We've had some exciting experiments where we have joint virtual classes between Tsinghua University and the University of Washington, and that sets the stage for a much more impactful 10 days in Beijing for our students than would have been the case if they'd just gone for the 10 days. The fact that by the time they arrive, they know the faculty and the students there, they've worked with them in group projects and like. I will say, Man, to the larger question, students have been asking, why aren't we cutting tuition? Because it's cheaper to deliver online. And our experience so far is it is not notably cheaper to deliver online, certainly not to stand up high quality, rigorous courses on short notice. There may be eventually some cost savings, but what has changed is how much cheaper it is for me to have an internationally renowned expert join the class for an hour and not have to pay thousands of dollars to fly them there to ask them to commit multiple days of travel each direction and everything else. It's just a lot easier to get people to say yes to some of these opportunities. So yeah, you know, life transforming experience as a sophomore studying in Europe. And it was life transforming in two ways. Realized that the world was an amazing place and I wanted to see more of it. And equally important, I realized that they paid faculty to do this. And so it was get one of those jobs and travel the world with students and in my own research and the like. So yeah, big fan of the lived experience, not just the virtual experience.
That's correct. So actually, you know, I was so happy that you mentioned your the collaboration between Tsinghua University and the UW. So that was actually, you know, something I wanted to ask you about, but then you answered that really well. And also just, you know, totally agree with you on having international renowned either scholars or, you know, professors. I mean, this is actually the same to us. So we were able to invite, you know, internationally known China scholars or China watchers to give us webinar, just, you know, like this in this kind of environment. So definitely it's technology is changing every aspect of our lives and work. So because actually it seems like, you know, you've answered most of the questions in the chat box over the course. There are, let me, so here's a question, I think, you know, more to Russ. So just now, Jeff talked about, you know, UW is likely to accept students from Green River or community colleges. So here's kind of like, you know, a full question. So, so how can a four-year college like Western Washington find the most appropriate students to attract from community colleges?
All right, that's a good question. It probably depends on the number of factors, but for the Chinese market, it would certainly be ranking. For good or for evil, that's a shortcut that most of our Chinese parents look at. And even that's complicated because University of Washington being, for example, I believe US News national rankings is something like 58, and US News global ranking is number 8. So how do you, what do you say about that?
Yeah, I'm always amazed by that, by the rankings.
So I think for smaller schools, and that really includes Green River, although we send students to ranking schools and have that, we've done that now for 30 years. So we can borrow the rankings of a UW or Berkeley and say, well, you're not there yet, but we can give you a legitimate shot at getting there and can. For Western, it's going to be more personal, I think. Who do you know? What people do you have that can advocate for you? You can get a great education at a lot of different schools, ranking and not. My son went to Western, had a great experience. But getting that through the rankings pathway for parents is difficult to do. There are grad schools that students can go to, so there's always that, which is kind of our technique at Green River, saying we can get you an undergrad school that's good. But it's going to be, I know so-and-so at X university that is similar to Western in China, for example. I sent 10 of my kids over on a short-term program. They loved it. Great things happened to them. It's going to be a personal touch, I think, rather than an institutional plan.
Thank you, Ross. So just last question. So you may not have the instance like this, but lately there have been unprovoked attacks on Asians in this country. Have you experienced a resentment of Asian students by domestic students on your campus as well? You can just say yes or no.
I mean, we've seen some very limited instances, but it plays out in a broader context on our campus. I mean, for a decade or more, we've fielded criticism from residents across the state who come to campus and complain about how many international students there are on our campus, particularly from Asia, and pointing out that 28% or thereabouts of our undergraduates are Asian Americans, right? It's just, they don't distinguish Asian American versus Asian citizen. And, so that's an educational problem for us that has less to do with, you just need better information about who's actually on the campus and the like. But again, some pretty inflammatory language in recent years about the concerns around international students in general and Asian students in particular.
Right. So this is actually to a pre-select question for this webinar, kind of, relation to. So just given, this kind of rhetoric, so how do universities or colleges maximize this kind of diversity experience, right? So maximize or accommodate international students' presence and also, their influences. What the universities can do, university and colleges can do, or what, your institutions have been doing.
Well, let me jump in and just say very quickly to the last question. At PLU, being a smaller institution in a smaller community south of Seattle, I haven't heard of any real issues with our Asian students. I think things have been pretty smooth there. However, it is an issue with the parents that fund the Chinese students that come. And so we have put a lot of effort into creating opportunities both through Zoom, but also with our staff going to China in person to meet parents and to assure them by giving them real information about what we do, that we have a good environment for their child to come and study in.
And
I think that's a good point.
I would say we haven't really had any issues on campus involving Asian or any other group of students, to my knowledge at least. In the community, we've had a little bit because we're not immune to the rest of society. Somebody shouting stupid things out of car windows, that kind of thing. But the numbers, again, are significant compared to other countries, I think. And Jeff, as you pointed out, we're an armed country, and that scares a lot of people. And the occasional mass shootings that we have do us no good. I've told students and parents, your chance of getting hit by a bread truck are a quantum number greater than getting shot. However, that also is not a very large possibility at all, but that certainly makes a lot of headlines. And so it does scare people, and that's just the reality we have to deal with.
Yeah, and I'm looking again at the chat and partly responding, Mon, to your question. So we will continue to do the things we've traditionally done on international education, study abroad, the Henry M. Jackson School, an amazing array of international area studies programs and degrees and the like, to train as many of our students as we can, whether at the major level or a minor. We are looking at possible certificate options that would denote whatever your major, whether there was, you had developed global competencies in it. As I say, we're also looking at how we can enrich the offerings through virtual study abroad, virtual research, virtual internships. But yeah, it's just the Washington workforce for the future is going to need to, as my colleague Roby Brannon puts it, be engaged in 60 years of education. They're going to keep coming back to each of our institutions time and time again, not for degrees, but for certificates and for other training that just helps them pivot to the new careers they've got. And in that space, my office has to imagine, well, what will that look like for constantly infusing international elements into that 60-year curriculum, and it not just be as important as it is to learn how to taste French wine and eat Italian food or Chinese food, but yeah, and how to work in an international business context. As I started, 3/4 of our students will stay in the state, and yet whether they're in the wine industry or the apple industry or the wheat industry, or they're building planes or building software, whatever, they're going to spend their entire lives both cooperating with and competing with professionals around the world. And they just need to we need to equip them throughout their career to be effective in that space.
Right. So thank you so much. And I'm here talking to you as a UW. So thank you so much. Thank you, Jeff, Ross, and Mikhail for sharing your thoughts and insights on such an important topic. And then, so the conversation will continue. Our time is up. So I'm just gonna conclude here, and then thank you for the audience to join with us as well. So have a great evening. All right, bye everyone.